Hello everyone, it is me, Captain Riku Series, and today we'll be discussing a much deeper topic that I covered in the last video. Specifically, who did the Bite of 87, and what is it? Surprisingly, this is still a massively debated topic as no one can seem to agree on who did the Bite of 87. Literally, at all. People say it's Withered Foxy, people say it's Toy Chica, people say it's Mangle, people even say that Withered Chica did it. So in this video, I'm going to go over every single candidate for the Bite of 87, discuss their evidence and their cons against it, etc., etc. And with all that out of the way, I'll begin discussing who did the Bite of 87. Since Withered Foxy happens to be the most popular candidate as to who did the Bite of 87, we'll be going over him first. The evidence that people mainly use to say that he did the Bite of 87 stems from the week before. Specifically, there's a text saying he's never bitten any kids, with kids specifically being an italic font, which actually implies that he didn't at all. Now, the second thing that people mainly use to say that he did the Bite of 87 is the fact that the animatronic was supposedly provoked by a flashlight. And in FNAF 2, Withered Foxy happens to be the most iconic animatronic with a flashlight weakness. Okay, good. That's basically all the evidence he has. Now let's look over the problems with those arguments. The problem I personally have with the text saying that Foxy's never bitten any kids in the week before is actually contradicted later in the book itself, as the week before also hints that Freddy himself did the Bite of 87, with Ralph wondering in his last moments before being killed by Freddy in one of the endings, wondering what would it be like to live without a frontal lobe. And the first thing we learn about the Bite of 87, well, one of the first things anyways, is that it's basically at the cost of someone losing their frontal lobe because someone bitten it off, which would obviously have to be one of the animatronics from FNAF 2. Not to mention, it's contradicted again in the week before, especially for the flashlight argument, where Bonnie himself actually gets affected by being flashed in the face by a flashlight. Basically, the week before is kind of unreliable when trying to question who did the Bite of 87. Sure, it hints at Foxy, but it also hints at Bonnie and Freddy. The cons with Withered Foxy doing the Bite of 87 is pretty simple, because in FNAF 2, Withered Foxy is in parts and service, and none of the withered animatronics are basically active during the day. Also, for those who say that the parts and service is the area where the bite could have taken place, there's a few problems with that. It was pretty implied that the bite itself took place in a public location. We know this because the animatronics were stripped of their roaming during the day. Their ability to be active during the day, aside from performing. Not to mention the fact it's given a name at all, the Bite of 87 goes to show that it's more of a company-known thing, and a public-known thing for that matter. And for those who keep using the week before as evidence, the text from the week before actually says that Fazbear Entertainment has been being criticized for the Bite of 87 ever since the date it happened. Not to mention, if it did happen in parts and service, Fazbear Entertainment could have just swept it under the rug, just like they did the missing kids incident. And not only that, it was specifically the toys themselves that were scrapped. People try saying that it's because of their malfunctioning issues, but the problem is that the Wizards share the same technology. Not only that, but a worse version of it because it's technically unfinished. Not to mention, if a Wizard did do the Bite of 87, why weren't they scrapped but the toys were when they basically share the same exact glitchy and unstable technology? So it must be one of the toys. So now that I've basically explained why it can't be the Wizards to do the Bite of 87, let's go on ahead and explain the toy animatronics as culprits. So before the week before, Toy Chica was actually the most popular candidate for the Bite of 87. So let's look at her evidence next. The thing that people would say as evidence for Toy Chica doing the Bite of 87 is her line in Ultimate Custom Night, where she says, "Where's her beak? Well, it's on your forehead, of course." And that's basically it. That's literally all she has. So now let's look at my problem with that argument. My main problem with that argument is that it's more so a reference to one of Scott's hints to the lore in FNAF than it is, the Bite of 87. Specifically when he was teasing the idea of, why is Toy Chica's beak missing? It could also easily mean that the Toy Chica kid in FNAF 4's minigame is actually the one who actually possesses Toy Chica via that connection. And that's actually supported in FNAF 2 and in FNAF 4. Even the controversial Into the Pit game. Specifically, after beating a minigame Into the Pit, specifically Rescue the Children, you'll earn a soundtrack saying, "Save them." And in particular, in that minigame, we see the same girl from FNAF 4. Basically, the one kid who mentions the rumors about animatronics moving around at night and, hiding your body, and the company will never tell anyone. That exact kid from FNAF 4's minigame is in Into the Pits Rescue the Children minigame, the same one that happens to unlock the Save Them soundtrack. This further supports my DCI story, by the way. Okay, now with Toy Chica out of the way, now let's cover Toy Bonnie. The one thing I've seen that people connected him to the Bite of 87 is Shadow Bonnie specifically. And the theory kind of works off as Toy Bonnie did the Bite of 87 because once he bit Jeremy's frontal lobe, a shadow creature was formed, and that was Shadow Bonnie. My main problem with that argument is that Shadow Bonnie actually appears before the bite itself took place, which we know happens after Night 6. Not to mention there's actually a better alternative for Shadow Bonnie's existence, simply being that he's a shadow creature formed from the agony of the DCI, in which, in my opinion, that actually makes a ton more sense, especially when realistically Toy Bonnie doesn't actually have any more hints than that. Now, Toy Freddy and Balloon Boy both have little to zero evidence for them doing the Bite of 87. The only hint that Toy Freddy has that he did the Bite of 87 is that the closer he is to the office, the more his mouth opens. And while I will admit that it is decent evidence on its own, I'll explain why it has a different purpose later, after we talk about Mangle. Now, Mangle herself is actually one of the top candidates for who did the Bite of 87, and that's still the main contender against Withered Foxy, surprisingly. Although, from what I see most of the time, people don't even utilize the evidence he has. The main evidence that I see people point towards her doing the Bite of 87 is simply her jump scare and his radio static. However, what people don't mainly realize is that she has a lot more evidence than that. Now you see, I will present you the evidence that I specifically have for Mangle, and I'm going to go into every last detail of it. And trust me, this will be quite the learning experience from you guys that will probably change your perspective from here on out. And off the bat, one of the most underlooked things I think that people ignore Mangle about is specifically how his design stands out from the others. Specifically how she stands out from Foxy and the toy animatronics too. See, take a good look at the toy animatronics and compare her to Mangle. Not only is he way more broken than the other toy animatronics, but she has a completely different color scheme opposed to the pattern of the other toy animatronics sharing the same pellets as the classics. Or, at least very similar pellets. Mangle, on the other hand, his pellet, compared to Foxy's, is completely different. She is completely white and pink, opposed to Foxy's red. And the reason I point this out is that there has to be a reason why she stands out completely different from not only the toys, but Foxy himself. That's not the only thing, because in the phone calls too, they seem to actually foreshadow Mangle doing the Bite of 87 as well. Okay, so hear me out. On Night 1, Ralph mentions the toy animatronics, right? And in FNAF 2, he mentions the withered animatronics and then mentions Foxy. In Night 3, he mentions Foxy again, and then talks about Mangle for an entire paragraph. On Nights 4 and 5, the animatronics start getting glitchy and haywire, kind of unstable, even concerning some of the patrons. Not only that, but on Night 5, it's stated that the Night Guard will be moved to day shift. This is not the only time it happens, by the way. Night 6 also says that he will be moved to the day shift and that he has to stay close to the animatronics to make sure they don't hurt anyone. You see, there's a decent build-up to the Bite of 87 in the phone calls themselves that I think people don't really look at. Especially when Foxy and Mangle themselves are the only ones directly mentioned in the calls. The puppet in particular is the only other animatronic, indirectly mentioned at least. But regardless, yeah, I think you see my point. So basically, all of this on top of her jump scare basically resembling the Bite of 87, where, she jumps at your head, and she's basically the only animatronic with that kind of specific animation, basically points towards her doing the Bite of 87. Also, you remember the Toy Freddy hint that I mentioned earlier? The fact that his mouth opens more the closer he is to the office? While I don't think that's supposed to represent him doing the Bite of 87, I think that's supposed to symbolize something else. Specifically, the toys themselves doing the Bite of 87. Think about it. Across the entire game, there's been constant hits that they did the Bite of 87. Toy Freddy's mouth opens more the closer he is to the office. Shadow Bonnie quite literally has more teeth than Toy Bonnie specifically, which is kind of an inconsistency. Toy Chica removes her beak, and Mangle jumps at your head. Not to mention, the toy animatronics in the very first night were stated to walk during the day. One of the first things we learn about the Bite of 87 in FNAF 1 is that the incident itself quite literally prevented any further animatronics in the establishment from roaming around in pizzerias. basically hinting at the idea further that the toy animatronics did the bite of 87, or one of them. Also, another key detail about Mangle that I thought I should personally mention is that she's basically the only animatronic in FNAF 2 who actually has a motivation for doing the bite of 87. He is torn apart by kids every day, and the staff basically just eventually accepted that and just let the kids do their own thing, leaving Mangle to be literally torn apart every single day. So eventually, when he sees the night guard, who just basically transferred over to the day shift, she finally snaps. Now, I do in fact think that Scott has been intending Mangle to be the one behind the bite of 87, and it's easily explainable. You see, when FNAF 2 came out, the only thing we were wondering was who did the bite of 87, because that was the only mystery about Five Nights at Freddy's that we were wondering about, and the most popular candidate was none other than Foxy himself. Make a whole nother set of animatronics and have them be scrapped, being implied because of the bite of 87, and lets us figure out who did it. And because Foxy was obviously the most likely candidate at the time before FNAF 2 released, I think Scott intentionally made Mangle stand out, design-wise. And his jump scare, of course. Not to mention, she is clearly designed to be the most unstable animatronic in the entire game. Mangle himself is quite literally a more broken down version of Foxy. Not to mention, she clearly doesn't share the same patterns as the toy animatronics, especially when they resemble their classic counterparts except to Mangle himself. Which quite literally begs the question, why is she standing out so much? Was this intentional by Scott Cawthon? It kinda has to be, because Scott Cawthon is quite literally known for dropping hints throughout the game itself. And the franchise for that matter. This can go through the audio cues, the jump scares, a lot of other things too. Mangle is just quite literally the most unique animatronic in the entire game. Other than Balloon Boy and the puppet, of course. And Withered Foxy, but I already explained why the Withers can't be the ones behind the bite of 87. Also, speaking of, let's go back to the week before, should we? The text about Foxy never biting any kids can easily apply to Mangle too. And that's because Ralph and the company and the patrons themselves all view Foxy and Mangle as the same character, just different models. And beforehand, I actually heard someone try to counteract this by saying that throughout the franchise there's been clearly separate characters in Ultimate Custom Night or in FNAF World. But my main problem with that is that there's a difference between in-universe and the overall gaming franchise. Besides, I'm basically looking into the perspective of the in-universe content kind of right now, which is something you kind of had to consider while trying to make a FNAF theory in general. Also, because this is Fazbear Entertainment we're talking about here, Foxy and Mangle would be under the same brand name. And before anyone says it, no, this does not apply to Funtime Foxy from Sister Location. And I say this because they are under a different establishment that has nothing to do with Eddie Fazbear's Pizza. And even if that was the case, Baby Circus was basically closed before FNAF 2 even began, which was kind of implied. At least between, 1985 and 1987. Regardless, my point is that comparing that to Funtime Foxy from Sister Location would be considered a false equivalence, because it's not even under the same IP as Foxy or Mangle. So basically, in other words, any statement about Foxy doing the bite of 87 could also apply to Mangle unless it's specifically stated to be classic Foxy from an out-of-universe source. Regardless, that is my personal conclusion. Mangle did the bite of 87. If I'm missing any evidence from any of the characters that I mentioned in this video, make sure to tell me down below. And tell me your own thoughts on who you think did the bite of 87. And did you become a Mangle believer after watching this video? And if you did, make sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel, and my main channel, by the way, even though it doesn't really cover FNAF that often, but I would appreciate the support. Anyways, that's going to be it for this video. If you guys want to see more content like this, make sure to make suggestions in my comments below, and tell me your thoughts about it, and why. So, yeah, see you later.